We're in a series of messages where it's called Great News. And we're talking about how Christianity is really great news, even though a lot of people in the world kind of might think that Christianity is bad news or at the very least a little bit annoying. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's the case. But last week we started this, and we're just going to be working our way through the Gospel of Mark, because the word gospel means literally great news. And we think that if Mark writes a book and he calls it great news, we should figure out why it's great news. So we're talking about it. And that's part of what the study that you're going in to Christianity Explored doing. It's going through the Gospel of Mark, and we're kind of dovetailing these two things together. But I want to start by just letting you know a story of something that happened to me this last week. Some of you know that we mailed out these postcards for Easter. And I got a phone call from a lady earlier this week. Her name is Cheryl. She got one of our postcards in the mail. She calls me up. She's got a really shaky voice, and I'm trying to find out what's going on. Is she really upset about something? She tells me she's over 90, and she just got back from Florida and is looking for a church, but doesn't drive so far. And I thought, but you drive? That's pretty remarkable. So she's over 90, and she does drive. She just doesn't want to drive very far. So she's asking me if we have a shuttle service, and we don't. But if any of you want to volunteer to drive Cheryl, just let me know afterwards, put it on your card or something, and, we'll take care of it. But I told her we didn't have a shuttle service, and I asked her a couple questions, trying to find out what kind of church she was looking for, and maybe a little bit more about her background and stuff. She tells me she lives on Kossuth Street, which is, she's near the intersection of Kossuth and 52. There's the Bob Rohrman Jeep dealer there, whatever. So she lives on Kossuth Street. And I'm like, well, I try to maintain a good relationship with other churches in the area, and I know there's a really strong church right on Kossuth Street. It's called Kossuth Street Baptist Church. And so I tell her, well, there's this church right up the street from you. It's not too far from you. And I say it's Kossuth Street Baptist, and I try to talk them up a little bit because I've met the pastor, and they're doing pretty good work there. So I mentioned that to her. Not that I'm saying anything bad about us, but I'm just saying, there's this other place too. Anyway, she comes back to me, and she says this phrase, and I was kind of stunned. She says, well, I wasn't raised Baptist. I was raised Methodist. And so I was just about to try to correct her and be like, well, labels don't really matter. All that. But she beat me to it, and she goes, but I don't think that really matters. So she says, I was raised Methodist, not Baptist, but I don't really think that matters. And I was like, yeah, right on. You're 90 years old, and you know that some things just don't matter. Some things just, we don't need to bother with that. But the labels to some people really do matter. I imagine if she were in her 20s and told her Methodist mother that she was going to go to a Baptist church, her Methodist mother might possibly say to her, you're what? No daughter of mine. I don't know. But so the idea is that some people, the labels matter. Why? If it's all Christianity, why do these different labels matter? Why do we even have labels like Methodist and Baptist? We talked a little bit about this last week, but I think partially what it is for us to understand is that we've turned Christianity into a system. I mean, the word itself is systematic. Christianity, it's no longer organic. It's not following Jesus, being a disciple, on the way. It's none of those classic terms that showed up in the first century right after Jesus ascended to heaven. Instead, we've got this organizational term, Christianity. And we've got all these other organizational terms, and we've turned following Jesus into a system. And everybody's got their own system. I mean, the Catholics have a system. And if you don't follow their system, you can't be part of their Catholic anything. And in fact, if you don't follow their system, they'll tell you that you're going to hell. The Methodists have a system. The Lutherans have a system. Baptists have a system. Non-denominational churches have a system. You don't know it, but we've got a system. Maybe you do know it. I don't know. But anytime you get a group of people together to try to do anything cooperatively, you have to have a system. You have to have something that sort of binds them all together, builds them all together. So systems aren't necessarily a bad thing. But the question is, what is the system doing? What is the system leading you toward? And is it all about following the system, or is it about something else? You see, what a system does is I can say, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to develop a system to make you like me. A system only makes you more like someone else who's already in that system. But every time I read anything about Jesus, he doesn't seem to fall into any system category at all. Here's the deal. Christianity is not about a system. It's more about following Jesus. Put that down. That's your first note to write down. Christianity is more about following Jesus than it is about following a system. Systems are not good news. When we come to the Gospel of Mark, the book that Mark wrote, he wasn't telling us about a system. You don't find anything in the Gospel of Mark about methods for baptism. You don't find anything in the Gospel of Mark about how frequently Christians should come together to worship God. You don't find anything in the Gospel of Mark about the kind of carpet should be in your building, or the style of music you should have, or whether it's okay or not to be in a strip mall next to a dentist. There's none of that in the Gospel of Mark. It just doesn't exist there because he's not about the system. He's about one thing and one thing only, and he gave it to us in the title of his book. Verse 1 is his own title, The Beginning of the Great News About Jesus, the Messiah. And we looked at that a little bit last week. That's Mark's angle. He wants to tell us just the first bit about what it means to understand who Jesus is. And he thinks it's great news. But there's a problem. When you read chapter 1 and chapter 2, you see some really amazing things. Jesus is healing people. He's casting out demons. He's teaching people some really good stuff. He's saying the kingdom of God is almost here. You ever wondered why things are so bad? Well, that's going to end because the kingdom of God is almost here. It's just about here. And when he gets here, he's going to set everything right. That's the stuff Jesus is talking about. And that's all good news. But there's a problem. Who is he? Who is this guy who shows up on the scene and gets dunked by John and then a dove descends and a voice comes out of heaven? Who is this guy who can walk up to someone who's been thrown on the ground by a demon and can speak to the demon leaves? Who is this guy who can touch a man with leprosy and the leprosy goes away? Who is this guy? See, that's the question that shows up time and time again in the first couple chapters of the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus gives us no help. In fact, he doesn't really tell us anything about himself. In fact, he does more than that. He tries intently to keep people in the dark. There are a couple verses I want to show you on the screen here in just a moment when we get our screen back. But he's trying to keep people in the dark. And here's the first one. There it is. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Keep going. "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. One more. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching? And with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." So in chapter 1, this demon says, "I know who you are. You're the Holy One of God." And Jesus says, "Shh. Stop that. Stop. Don't say that." Why? He's trying to make this guy keep quiet. And so the people, when they ask the question, they're like, "What is going on here? I mean, who is this guy?" The demon knows who he is, but Jesus is like, "Shh, don't say it." The next verse, check this one out. "A different guy, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning, 'See that you don't tell this to anyone.'" I tell you what, part of my job is to try to convince you that you need to tell people about Jesus, okay? I think every one of us in this room needs to make it a regular habit, a practice of our life, that every opportunity we get, we're trying to tell other people about how great Jesus is and what he's done for us and how awesome. Sometimes you can invite them to church, but at the very least, tell them about Jesus. That's the thing. And so I'm trying my best to try to convince all of you that you and I need to do that together. We got to do that. But Jesus doesn't. He's like, "Whatever you do, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone about me. I'm just going to go from town to town. I'm just going to do my stuff, but don't you tell anyone about me." Okay, so here's the next one. Check this out. Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. As if there are other reasons to let demons speak. You know, he's like, because they know who I am, that's the reason I want the demons to keep their mouths shut. Because they knew who he was. One more. "Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, 'You are the Son of God.' But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him." Scholars call this the messianic secret. They're confused like you and I are. They're like, why is Jesus telling everybody to keep their mouths shut? And so they've got some theories. One theory that the scholars have come up with is that the Gospel of Mark, being the oldest of all the Gospels, being the newest, has the least amount of mythology, and that the real historical Jesus didn't want to be the Messiah. Some scholars say the real historical Jesus didn't believe he was the Son of God, didn't want to be the Son of God, didn't want to be the Messiah, and so he was telling everybody to keep their mouths shut when they were saying such lunacy. These scholars say that Jesus was just a normal dude who just wanted to be a normal dude, just wanted to teach people. Some other scholars say that Jesus knew he was the Messiah, and he was cool with that, but that the demons were trying to gain magical power over Jesus, and he was trying to shut it down. Because see, back in that society, they believed that if you wanted to have magical authority over someone else, you needed to know that someone else's name, and you needed to invoke that person's name. And so by speaking that other person's name, you could cast a hex on them or have some type of magical power over them. And so some scholars are like, well, maybe the demons were trying to get spiritual power over Jesus by using his name. But there's no place in the Bible where we're told using someone's name actually gives you any kind of spiritual or magical power. So for the demons to be trying this doesn't really make sense. So I don't buy that. I also don't buy the fact that Jesus didn't want to be Jesus, that he wanted to be just some other dude who was just going around healing people, casting out what? Okay, so anyway, I don't buy the I'm not the Messiah, keep your mouth shut idea. So something else is going on. In fact, if you look in these same chapters we were just in, we see some very clear pictures of who Jesus thought he was. Okay? He knows who he is. Check this out. Here's this first verse. Jesus says, I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So then he says to this man, get up and take your mat and walk. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. Now, for those of you who've been around here for a little while, you might have heard me talk about this before. But Son of Man is a specific phrase that comes out of the Old Testament. It comes out of Daniel chapter 7. If you want to jot that down, go ahead. Daniel chapter 7. In that chapter, Daniel sees this vision. And it's an immense vision of a ton of evil that's going on in the world. And then what he sees is he sees an individual that he describes looking like a son of man. That's the only description we have for this individual. Daniel sees this image, this vision of someone who looks like a son of man. And that individual goes before someone else who's called the Ancient of Days, who's sitting on a throne. So here's this dude sitting on the throne, and he's called the Ancient of Days, and he's high and exalted.